Hello everyone and welcome to the Food Research and Action Center webinar, Why Social Justice Organizations Can and Should Prioritize Voter Registration and Get Out to Vote Efforts. At this point, I'd like to pass the floor over to our moderator for today, Susan Boudin. Susan, if you're ready, the floor is now yours.
The Food Research and Action Center, or FRAC. Thank you for joining today's webinar. This is the first in a series co-hosted by Coalition on Human Needs, FRAC, Network, and the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. This series is designed to elevate the importance of social justice organizations engaging in nonpartisan elections work and to provide ideas on the many ways your organization can help engage, register, and mobilize people to exercise their right to vote in the time of COVID-19. We'll kick things off today by discussing a bit on why social justice organizations should engage in this work. Then we'll dive into the rules for 501c3 organizations with Leslie Barnes from Alliance for Justice's Bolder Advocacy program. We'll wrap up with information on a few key resources and the next webinars in the series. Throughout, we'll be hearing from co-host organization leadership on why this work is essential to our mission. So why engage? Tens of millions of eligible voters did not exercise the right to vote in the last presidential election, with non-voting rates especially high among individuals with lower household income and among Black, Asian, Latinx, American Indian, and Alaskan Native individuals. And that was all before COVID-19. We're now in an unprecedented circumstance in so many respects. No one knows better than you the devastating impact COVID-19 is having on the ability of people in our communities to just survive. To mention only one example, an analysis by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities found that 19 million children live in a household that didn't pay rent on time in the previous month and/or did not have enough to eat in the past week. And COVID-19 has also caused major challenges for how the 2020 elections process will unfold. You can see a few examples on this slide. These challenges are not limited to certain states or certain political parties. They are nonpartisan and they impact people across the country and across all parties. And they could have devastating, long-lasting effects on our nation. Elections matter to our communities and to our missions. Making progress towards a more just world without poverty, hunger, and homelessness requires political will. We all have a vital role to play in nonpartisan efforts to help engage, register, and mobilize people in our communities to participate in the democratic process. And while much of the nation is focused on the presidential election, it's important to note that there are thousands of elections this year at the national, state, county, and local levels that will have deep implications for how our nation addresses issues related to hunger, poverty, healthcare, employment, and housing. We want to hear from you via a quick poll on your screen what you think the benefits of this work are. Michael?
The audience members should see this poll live on your screen. It says, what are the benefits for your organization of engaging clients struggling against poverty, hunger, or lack of affordable housing and nonpartisan election-related activities? You can select all of the answers that apply. You'll see there's more candidates recognize issues important to clients. Your clients benefit from participating in civic activity. Your organization forms new partnerships, or your staff is energized. And we'll give you just a moment here to select your answer.
Thanks, Michael. Yes, as you probably guessed, all of these are benefits for engaging in election-related work, and we'll be talking more about these benefits in future webinars. Before digging into the C3 rules with Leslie, we wanted to share messages from the leaders of FRAC and CHN, and later in the webinar, we'll be hearing from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition and Network. Michael, will you please play the video?
Hi, I'm Luis Guardia, President of the Food Research and Action Center, or FRAC. For 50 years, FRAC has been working to end hunger in America. Today, the nation is faced with an alarming and growing number of households that are finding it harder and harder to put food on the table as the public health and economic crisis created by COVID-19 continues to unfold. This election season, we need every candidate to prioritize putting an end to hunger, especially when we have proven solutions. Federal nutrition programs like SNAP school meals, WIC, and food provided at childcare and after-school and summer programs help stretch household budgets while ensuring people have access to the nutrition they need. Political will is critical to ensuring these and other nutrition programs reach more hungry households. Your 501c3 organization can help through nonpartisan election activities such as voter registration and candidate education. You can elevate the issue of hunger and the solutions that exist. Together, we can mobilize the political will needed to end hunger. After all, ending hunger in the wealthiest nation is something we should all agree on and something we must all act on.
I'm Debbie Weinstein with the Coalition on Human Needs. Democracy is not a spectator sport, but the way to play is not with this or this. People need to vote. This year is like no other in my lifetime. The pandemic has shown us day after day that the choices our leaders make affect our lives and our livelihoods. So everyone eligible should take up their democratic responsibility to choose their leaders by voting. But the pandemic has made voting more complicated. Lots of people want to vote by mail. They need to know the rules and the deadlines. Or if they want to vote in person, they may find their polling location has changed. This is where you come in. Nonprofit organizations and faith groups can help the people you serve and others in your community by reminding people of their deadlines to register and to request absentee ballots. You can post that information on your website or Facebook homepage with links to official sites. You can give people flyers. You can post to online parent groups. You can think of the best ways to reach the people you know, serve, and work with. This is all perfectly allowable. You're not telling anyone a single thing about who's running for office. You're simply equipping people with the basic information they need so they can register and vote. We at the Coalition on Human Needs want to make this easy for you to do. So we've teamed up with other organizations to provide you with access to accurate voter information for your area, and with graphics and content for your website, for social media, and for flyers you can print out. We know you're busy, and the way you interact with people in your community has changed. But nothing we do works well if our neighbors do not participate in our democracy. So thanks for listening and for giving everyone a chance, not just to watch others affect their lives, but to vote for themselves and their families.
Thanks, Michael. One easy way for your organization to support this work is to have your own leadership make a video. We'd love to see your videos on social media with the hashtag #NonProfitVote. And many thanks to the fabulous Nonprofit Vote for use of their hashtag. And now we'll be hearing from Leslie Barnes, Senior Counsel for Bolder Advocacy Program at Alliance for Justice. Leslie?
Thank you, Susan. Much appreciated. I think my slides are moving on their own. Michael, if you can help me here. I loved listening to the videos of Luis and the president for the Coalition of Human Needs. And Susan, I almost wonder what you all need me for. But I am really excited to be here and thrilled to see all the people on the line today. At Bolder Advocacy, we are a program of Alliance for Justice, and we have worked with so many of the moderators and hosts of today's program, and we just wanted to thank them. We have free resources, so I hope today, if we have not already talked to you, is just the beginning of the conversation. Foundations make our work possible, foundations and donors, and so you can reach out to our attorneys across the country. You can call us and you can email us. You can connect with our attorneys, and while we cannot form an attorney-client relationship with your organization, we can help provide technical guidance on your tax-exempt questions. And so if you have a question about whether something is safe to post or safe to tweet. And so that's what we're here talking about today, is how can your organization get political but stay nonpartisan? So a lot of tax-exempt entities that are 501c3s know that they have to stay nonpartisan, but sometimes they're scared into silence and feel like they cannot get political. But couldn't be further from the truth. Whether you're working on economic security issues, housing issues, or income insecurity issues, those issues are political, and you can talk about those policy issues. Again, I apologize. I will resume control of these slides here. So yes, we are going to talk about all the ways you can advocate for policy change and encourage people to get involved and vote. And then we'll also talk about some ways you can combine the issue advocacy with civic engagement. There are a few simple rules to know. And that first rule is that if you belong to a 501c3, which is a public charity or a private foundation, you cannot, your organization, and when you are representing that organization, whether on social media or in person or through email, your organization cannot support or oppose a candidate for elected office. That's what the IRS means when it says a 501c3 must remain nonpartisan. You cannot intervene in the outcome of an election. And a lot of C3 know that they can't write a check to a candidate and they can't endorse a candidate, but there's a lot of different ways that that support or opposition for a candidate could manifest itself. Criticizing a candidate, that's illegal for a 501c3, and it could jeopardize your organization's tax-exempt status. But you all, as volunteers or employees of a C3, you can do that in your own individual capacity, on your own time, using your own resources. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can make sure that if you are working on a candidate campaign in your own time, how you can distinguish that partisan political activity from your own C3 representational capacity. And so most of the focus will be on how your C3 can engage members of the community in nonpartisan activity. Just wanted to mention, in case any of you work in states that have ballot measures, these might be constitutional amendments or referenda or bond measures. These are questions on the ballot that don't involve candidates. These are questions like legalization of marijuana or allowing returning convicted felons to vote. Those types of questions that can be answered with a yes or no answer by voters. Those ballot measures, those your organization can support and oppose. They can indicate how people should vote. Those are generally going to be lobbying, types of lobbying. And C3 public charities can lobby a limited amount. You have to track it and stay within your limits. So the prohibition to remain nonpartisan is not to support or oppose candidates for elected office. Okay. And we saw this just last month in Missouri. There were a number of nonprofits that worked to expand Medicaid. And so residents in Missouri will for the first time ever see an expansion in Medicaid. And we even had some private foundations that were involved very early on. And while they didn't lobby and they didn't express support or opposition for the ballot measure, they did some non-lobbying research activity on the ballot measure. And so today we're going to be talking about kind of the broad overarching tax rules that govern your organization's election year advocacy. But I wanted to mention that there are a number of other rules and regulations that apply if you're conducting voter registration or voter outreach. And those are kind of beyond the scope of today's presentation, but I wanted to make sure and flag them so that you are aware to seek out other resources for those other types of resources. So If you're registering voters, you might or might not be aware there's a federal voter registration form that almost all states, that federal form is a good in, and then each state will have a variety of voter registration forms, sometimes in English and a variety of other foreign languages. If you're dealing with military or overseas voters, then there are some different procedures for military and overseas voters, how you can transmit their forms because they're overseas. And likewise, there are some state voter registration laws. The US Constitution allows the states to govern the time, place, and manner of elections, and that includes registering voters. And so each state has a different deadline on when people must complete their voter registration application and how they can be delivered, whether they can be delivered online or they have to have a wet ink signature on their voter registration application. So make sure that you check out your state's voter registration laws if you're going to actually be conducting and helping people register to vote. We at bolderadvocacy.org have a number. We have about 35 different states' voter registration laws and how they apply to nonprofits. So you can check those out at bolderadvocacy.org, and we're continually expanding those states that we do have and updating them. And then I also wanted to point out that nonprofits receive funds from a number of different donation streams, individual donors, grants from private foundations and community foundations, and then sometimes government grants. And if you are a government grantee or a government contractor or vendor, you need to be really particular to read your grant agreement and the enabling statutes that come with it. And I know we may have a few people on the call today that either work with Head Start or CSBG, Community Services Block Grant funding, and those have some additional layers and rules about engaging in nonpartisan voter registration activities. So just be sure to check with CapLaw. It is an organization that many of you may have access to for those additional rules and regulations that apply to Head Start and CSBG if you are a community action organization. As Michael said, please feel free to type in questions in the Q&A box, and we will be happy to answer those questions as we go. So as a 501c3, as Lewis and the president from Coalition on Human Needs indicated, you absolutely can share with your community on social media or a variety of ways through mail pieces and advertising and even door knocking. If your state allows it and if it's safe to do, you can share with people the information on how to vote, what the deadlines are. And one of the safest and easiest ways to do that is to share information either from a government entity like your Secretary of State or Lieutenant Governor's site, whoever your state election official is, or to share information from a reliable 501c3. And I know that Vote to End Hunger is a coalition of 501c3s. They have a website and a social media account, and they are continually updating and using the hashtag Vote to End Hunger and sharing out information and websites that have some of the most, that help people understand the rules around registering to vote, as well as educating people on the issues that are important in this year's election, especially involving hunger and food insecurity issues. So today, we're going to talk about ways, the three categories that are in white. We're going to talk about how to combine your issue advocacy with voter education and voter outreach. But do know that there are some other types of permissible C3 election year advocacy just beyond the scope of today's discussion, but you can find them on our website in a free publication called The Rules of the Game, and I link to it further down. And that's how to educate candidates, how to work on ballot measures, and how to share resources and polling results if you have affiliated organizations or you're working in coalitions. So maybe some of you have an affiliated 501c4, or maybe you're working with other 501c3s, or even 501c4 organizations. And so those types of activities are discussed in some of our other publications as well. So when you're talking about voter engagement, you may say, hey, Leslie, how do I know if my voter engagement activity is nonpartisan? It's going to depend. And if you call our hotline, which you are welcome to do, and it's free for all nonprofit organizations to contact us, we've got 9 attorneys around the country, we're probably going to say it depends upon the facts and circumstances. So we'll want to talk to you and find out a little bit more about the activity that you're planning. And so let's take a look at how the IRS is going to look at some of your voter engagement and advocacy activities, and why the facts are so important. And just changing the facts and changing the timing is going to change the outcome and determine whether your activity is safe or more risky. And that's generally how we talk about it, because in election year advocacy, there's not a lot of safe harbors. There's not a lot of bright lines. And so we talk about it on a continuum, kind of green light, yellow light, red light. And so in this first example, we've got a national housing organization. So they focus on all sorts of national issues dealing with housing affordability and zoning laws and economic development, all sorts of issues. But in this example, they all of a sudden have gotten involved in a zoning issue in a small city in North Dakota. And so they've sent out a mail piece in October, right before the 2020 election. And they're talking about an upcoming zoning law in 2021 that could help or harm their community, as their organization feels like maybe this zoning law could be harmful to their community. And in this, hypothetical fact scenario, there happen to be 2 city council candidates who've made their views really well known on this zoning law. One of the council candidates has said they're in favor of the zoning law, and one of the council candidates has made their view known that they would oppose the zoning law. And so even though this mailing doesn't mention the candidates by name, if those candidates' views on the issue are well known, that's considered a wedge issue. So if the issue divides the candidates, and the candidates have made their issues on the view well known, that's considered a wedge issue. And so it can depend upon election district by election district what a wedge issue is. And so if this national housing organization kind of parachutes in and sends a mailing into this small city in North Dakota where they've never worked before, so there's no history of advocacy in North Dakota, especially in a local unit of government. And all of a sudden, even though they don't even mention the candidates, they're talking about this issue, and maybe they're sending this mailing to a group of undecided voters, it begins to look like this mail piece is a substitute for talking about the candidate election. And especially if the candidate's views are known, it begins to look like this mail piece is a substitute for supporting the candidate that is opposed to the zoning ordinance. And so even without ever saying the candidate's name, this organization has just sent out a partisan mailing piece. And if they were a C3 organization, it would be impermissible for them to engage in. If you're a C4, it might be permissible, because 501c4s and 501c5s, they can support an opposed candidate. But let's change up the facts a little bit. So in the next fact scenario, instead of a nationwide housing organization, now we have a local housing organization in California. And they are focused on an upcoming county commission vote to rehab vacant property and turn it into low-income housing. And this local housing organization, their primary mission is to increase affordable housing. Their focus is on low-income housing. And they have a history of advocacy in this community in California. And so now there's a vote coming up in April. And so this organization, the C3 organization, plans to send out a mailer or to tweet on social media or on Instagram in March a message that talks about this upcoming vote and encouraging people to call their county council members. And so it's a type of issue advocacy. It's not an issue that divides any candidates, even if there is an upcoming primary or general election. So it's not a wedge issue. And this is a strictly issue advocacy type of communication. It's safe. It's way, it's green light. It's entirely safe and permissible for the C3 to engage in. And so you can begin to see how issue advocacy, even if it doesn't mention candidates or an election, can cross that line into impermissible partisan activity. And so C3s have to be really careful where they're targeting their activity. And so the IRS gives us a list of good facts and bad facts to look at. And this has come in a number of IRS revenue rulings. And they say that when a C3 is engaged in issue advocacy, it is better if you make no reference to candidates and that you have an external factor driving your communication. In other words, there's an upcoming vote. You're not trying to intervene in the outcome of the election. Like in our first example, we don't know why this national housing organization parachuted into North Dakota and was talking about an issue that wasn't even going to come up until 2021. It sure looked like they were trying to sway the outcome of the election. So it looked like their timing was motivated by the election, whereas in the second fact example, looks like the external factor was driven by an upcoming vote in the county commission. The IRS is going to look at if you target your communication. Like in the first example, we said the fictitious National Housing Organization targeted their mail piece to undecided voters. You can target certain groups of people that are underrepresented at the polls, but if it looks like you're targeting your communication to try to sway the outcome of the election or favor one type of candidate or one political party over the other, then it's going to look much more risky and it could jeopardize your organization's tax-exempt status. Looks like we have a question. So before I do that, one other really important factor, and no one factor is more important than the other, but another one that really weighs heavily is the history of your organization's advocacy. So we always encourage C3s to start advocating early and not to ramp up their advocacy right before an election, and to continue their advocacy beyond the election. And so your campaign to vote to end hunger, it is always better, always safer to continue that campaign on through the election and into next year as you're shaping your legislative and policy initiative. That way it doesn't look like, you don't want to stop your campaign on November 3rd or, the day after the election. You want to continue that advocacy on up through and into subsequent years. So let's see, we've got a couple questions here. Somebody asks, do we have to be careful what we post on social media? Absolutely. So all the rules we're talking about apply to social media just as though they apply to a TV or a radio ad or in-face and in-person communication. So all of these rules apply no matter how you are communicating or getting your message out. Great question. Another question, is it possible to have this presentation conducted, for my nonprofit organization who has a field staff? Yes. So we would be happy to talk to you afterwards about either presenting this webinar or maybe one customized. We also have public webinars for smaller organizations that may be a little bit more affordable. So we'd be happy to talk to you. Let's see. And there's another question. Can a Meals on Wheels volunteer who promotes a particular candidate be considered a representative of a C3? So can a Meals on Wheels volunteer who promotes a candidate be considered a representative of a C3? Yes. So volunteers of your C3, when they are representing your C3, maybe they're wearing your t-shirt or they're attending a C3 event on your behalf, they have to follow the rules that apply to your C3. So let me say that again. When a volunteer is acting on your organization's behalf and they're representing your organization at an event, or they have control of your Twitter account, or they are sending out a mail piece on behalf of your organization, or they're meeting with an elected official on behalf of your organization, or they're conducting a voter registration drive on behalf of your C3, and they're just volunteering and they're not even paid, those volunteers still have to follow all of these rules and remain nonpartisan. However, in their own time, separate from your organization, they can still work on a candidate's campaign, endorse a candidate, and on their own social media account, their own personal Facebook and Twitter account, they can support and endorse a candidate. They have to be very clear that they're speaking in their own individual capacity when they're working on a candidate campaign and endorsing a candidate or posting or criticizing a candidate. So it's really important to either have two separate social media accounts, like we do at AFJ. I have a AFJ Twitter account and I have my personal Twitter account. Or if you only have one Twitter account or one social media account, you have to make it very clear in each post if you're speaking in your individual capacity or your C3 representational capacity. There are a number of ways you can do that. Same with if you're attending an event, maybe you can wear a name tag that says, I'm Leslie Barnes, representative of Alliance for Justice. So I'm here in my C3 capacity. But at night, in my own time and using my own resources, I volunteer for candidates all the time. As a matter of fact, my husband's a former state representative, so we worked in Democratic politics and on Democratic campaigns all the time. But that was in my own time, and I did not do that using C3 resources. So all of your issue advocacy and your social media posts, you're going to need to evaluate them kind of for this range of risk. So let's talk about what to do if an elected official that you want to praise or criticize for their official activity also happens to be a candidate on the ballot. I can think of a couple instances. We've got the president, who's not only an elected official, and he's still acting in his official capacity, passing executive orders, vetoing legislation, passing legislation, adopting legislation. So he's acting in his official capacity, but he's also running a candidate campaign. So he's a candidate for president and he's the sitting president. And elected officials are fair game. C3s can praise and criticize elected officials for their official activity as long as it furthers your organization's mission. So you always have to keep in mind your activity has to be connected to your organization's mission. So a housing organization wouldn't want to parachute in and talk about reproductive rights unless there was some tie-in to your organization's mission. But here, this example, I've got to blow up this example so I can see it. Oh, Coalition on Human Needs retweeted Shelterforce. And so this is a really good example of a couple different rules. One of the rules is if you are retweeting something or resharing a social media post, the IRS says that the post that you're sharing has to have been permissible for the C3 to write. So you always have to think before you hit retweet or share on social media, would this have been safe for my own C3 to write? And here, it looks like it was. All the facts and circumstances that I can see, this tweet was issued August 13th by a coalition called Shelterforce. I think it's a news organization. I remember looking it up. And they're criticizing President Trump's executive order. So they're focusing on his official actions, and they're talking about his executive order on, his recent executive order on delaying evictions for people who lived in or rented with federally backed mortgages, I think, was the kind of limited executive order that he passed. And so Shelterforce commented on it, and Coalition on Human Needs retweeted it. And the IRS will look at your retweet in the context that it was made. And so here are the rules that we have gleaned from the IRS rulings. You want to continue focusing on your policy issues, not to comment on the candidate. You don't want to comment to try to influence the elections, and you don't want to comment on any personal characteristics. So here, Coalition for Human Needs, they simply retweeted it with no editorializing, no comments. But if they wanted to add some comments, they could have. And what I would say to them is I would use the word President Trump to always distinguish that you're talking about President Trump, not candidate Trump. And I would always speak close to the official action in which he engaged in, or any elected official. So if you're going to comment on official action, it should be tied in close proximity to their action on it. In other words, don't wait until a few days or a week before the election to say, hey, remember back in August when President Trump passed this half-hearted, eviction protection. That looks like you're trying to influence the outcome of the election and to remind voters. And same with hashtags. The IRS says any hashtag that you use or that you retweet is fair game. It's a form of communication. And so you have to make sure your hashtags are also safe and C3 permissible. We have a fact sheet. We have a fact sheet, and I've linked to it here that you can find on our website, and it's free to download, that talks about praise and criticism of elected officials, incumbents. So there are also ways in which you can educate voters, both on the candidate stance and on the process of voting. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Here are a couple examples, really simple ways in which your organization can engage. So if you're not sure what to do, as the president from the Coalition on Human Needs said in her video, sharing the information about voting, people's polling places, voter registration deadlines, how to request an absentee ballot, how you might be able to return somebody's absentee ballot. There's different laws in each state. And so here we see Coalition on Human Needs, again, retweeting another C3 organization. And this is actually a retweet that includes a link. And so the IRS says anything you link to, your organization is liable for. So you want to make sure the links are safe and C3 permissible. So generally, it's safer to link to a C3. If you link to a C4, you have to be really careful and monitor what's at the end of that link so that it doesn't include a candidate endorsement. Another really safe tip or best practice is for a C3 to share something from an official, government official. And I'm from Indiana, so I picked Secretary Connie Lawson, our Secretary of State from Indiana, and it would be permissible for a C3 to share something from the state's chief election official on voting and elections as well. That's another safe, simple way to help educate voters on the voting process. Here's a way in which you could educate voters on the candidates. You could conduct candidate debates and candidate forums. Now, there are special rules if you're conducting a debate with federal candidates, either congressional or presidential candidates. But assuming that you're not conducting a debate with federal candidates, here are the rules for candidate debates for state and local candidates. You need to ask unbiased questions. You need to invite all viable candidates. And that doesn't just mean the two major party candidates. So if you're holding a gubernatorial candidate debate or a city council candidate debate, you need to ask all the viable candidates, even the minor party candidates. The moderator needs to be impartial. So it's best if you don't have somebody who's a particularly partisan person in the community asking the questions. And you need to ask the same question of all the candidates, give all the candidates the same amount of time to answer. And we have seen some organizations get really creative during COVID and hold online candidate debates, or even record each individual candidate individually, and they ask each individual candidate the same set of questions, give them each the same amount of time to answer, and then they put the whole video together and they upload it to their website. And you have to be really careful as a C3. You may want to pick out little juicy quotes and tweet them, but you can't do that. You can't highlight what one candidate said. You can't highlight or draw parallels between candidates and your organization's mission, because that appears partisan. That appears like you are signaling which candidates your organization supports or who would make the better candidate. And that's not permissible. But it is permissible to present all the information in full without any commentary or any editorializing. You might see some nonprofits who will grade or rate the candidates. Those are not 501c3s, or those are 501c3s that don't know any better. So there are nonprofits who can rate and endorse candidates, and those are going to be like your ACLU, your 501c4s, or your human rights campaign, or your labor organizations, because they can engage in partisan activity. They're still tax exempt, but they don't have to remain nonpartisan. So be careful, just because they're nonprofit, don't always follow what you see other nonprofits do. And feel free to always call our technical assistance hotline. Another way in which you can educate the voters on where candidates stand on the issues is a candidate questionnaire and then put it together in a candidate guide. And so the same type of rules apply as the rules that apply in a candidate debate. I'm going to go ahead and check and see if we've got a question that says, if an elected official or candidate reaches out to our organization for a legitimate partnership or collaborative opportunity, but it seems to be interpreted as a photo op, how should we handle it, the meeting or the communication? So there's two different answers. If an elected official reaches out to partner with your organization, you might be able to, I guess the answer is kind of the same. It's much harder to meet with one candidate at a time. So let me take elected official. And this may be beyond the scope of this webinar, but I'll take a stab at it. So the IRS says two things about engaging with candidates. If your organization reaches out to candidates to educate them, you have to reach out to all candidates. Or if you invite candidates to come and talk, like in a debate setting or a candidate meet and greet, you have to invite all the candidates of a specific race, like city council race. However, the rules are not the same if a candidate calls you. Then the equal opportunity rule doesn't apply. And so if a candidate calls your organization with a question, if your organization takes calls from the public, it may be okay for your organization to answer that candidate's question if the information is publicly available. So that's the easiest type of question. If a candidate calls and says, hey, how many people in Indianapolis are eligible for food stamps, and you guys have that information publicly available and you don't have to go and do the research, you could provide the answer to that candidate. The thing you have to be careful is you don't want to become the research wing of that candidate's campaign. You don't want to provide talking points for that candidate. So you can't sit down with the candidate and help them shape and talk about an issue. But you could send a briefing booklet out or a booklet out to all the candidates of a particular race and say, we hope that you will consider these issues. We hope that you will adopt these platform ideas. And if a candidate does adopt one of your platforms and make it their own, it's great and you're excited about it, but you can't highlight that. You can't talk about it on social media, unfortunately, from your C3 capacity. You can have other individuals do it, but for your C3 to do it is going to look partisan. You have to be really careful about photo opportunities. If it's a C3 permissible event, especially if it's an elected official and you've got a history with them, there are times when they can come to your organization. You can invite them to site visits and they can take pictures. And you're not held liable for what they do with that photo. But you don't want to retweet them if it begins to look like it's a campaign stunt. Just be careful what you guys do in your C3 capacity. Let's see, there's another question. It says, I was talking about that it's safe to provide links to C3s. How about a link to the New York Times? The New York Times has a lot of great info related to absentee ballots nationwide. So links to news publications is going to depend, because news organizations endorse candidates sometimes. So you've got to make sure your link goes to nonpartisan news articles and not to the editorial page. Or if it is an editorial page, you have to make sure the editorial article, the opinion piece, is nonpartisan, and that's a little harder to do. Would be happy to take a look at the article that you want to link to and kind of give you an idea of if it's risky or not. But kind of what the IRS says is, if that article that you're linking to, if it indicates, if that article would tend to help or hurt a candidate's chances, then it's probably going to be risky for you to link to. Now, if it has an unintended consequence of helping or hurting a candidate, then you're not going to be held liable for it. But if the opinion piece is, highly critical of the president, it's going to be a little bit more risky. You're going to have to do that facts and circumstances analysis. Wanted to talk about voter engagement, voter registration too. Susan, wanted to make sure on our time check here, I know it's 3:50.
Yes, thank you, Leslie. We'll probably need to start the wrap up in about 2 to 3 minutes.
All right, wonderful, thank you. So all of what we're talking about is available in a publication that we have called Rules of the Game. And it is at the end of these slides. And I think Susan said she is going to make these slides available to you all. So another type of voter engagement that your organization can participate in is registering voters or encouraging people to register to vote. And what the IRS says about voter registration is pretty minimal. And don't forget, there are lots of other rules about voter registration, state rules and federal rules, even grantee and government contract rules. But the IRS says if a C3 is going to conduct voter registration, you can't suggest who to vote for. So likewise, you have to be willing to register everybody who approaches your voter registration table or who submits a voter registration application to one of you or your volunteers. So if somebody comes up and they are the most hateful person and they indicate that they would never support your organization's mission and they complete a voter registration form, you have to treat it with the utmost respect and handle it the same way you would every other completed voter registration application. You have to make the service available to everyone, but the really cool thing is the IRS says you can target your voter registration engagement and outreach activities. And we may not have a lot of time to talk about targeting, but what the IRS says is that if you have an underrepresented group, a group that's underrepresented at the polls, say low-income voters make up 20% of the Indianapolis population, but they only vote at 5%, you can target your outreach and activity to those low-income population. So you don't have to spread yourself really thin. The IRS says you can also target your activity to where you have your volunteers and where you have your offices or where you have your natural constituency, where your community, your supporters are, your followers. You just can't target your activity towards one group of people who have indicated they are likely to vote a certain way in a candidate election. Let's see, those are the rules. Let's see, we have a publication here. It's a new publication this year on voter registration drives and the C3 rules around it. and it talks more about targeting, and the link is right there. Here's the slide that somebody asked about. Do all these rules apply to social media? Yes, they do. And then here's kind of the rule we've hinted about. So on your own time, in your own individual capacity, all the rules we've talked about do not apply, but you have to be really clear that if you're working on a candidate campaign, that you are representing yourself and not your C3 organization. And with that, I'll just fast forward, let's see, right here to our publications, kind of our key publications, and then I will turn it over to Joseph. Let's see, I think Joseph, or Joey, Joseph.
Hey, this is Susan. Just a couple of quick notes before we get some great info from Joe at Coalition on Human Needs. Thank you, Leslie, for the rich information and all the wonderful participant questions. We are recording this webinar and we'll be sending the slides and the recording to all who registered, as well as some information that we didn't get to in the questions today. And then quickly, as we move to the last part of the webinar, we want to hear from you. So as we wrap up, please feel free to pop in the Q&A your response to this question on what nonpartisan election-related work you're doing or you're interested in doing at your nonprofit organization. And then also, we wanted to highlight quickly some additional webinars in our series, as well as a few key resources. In webinars 2 and 3, which will be in September and October, we'll dive much more deeply into examples of work your organization can undertake to help people engage in the democratic process. And during these webinars, as well as in between, we'll be elevating many more resources and actions, big and small, you can take, such as joining the Vote to End Hunger Coalition. We'll be circulating these slide decks again, so you'll be able to click on the links to all these resources. And now over to Joe from Coalition on Human Needs for a moment before we wrap up with some inspiration from the National Low Income Housing Coalition and Network. Joe?
Hi, this has been wonderful, and I'm so excited about the work ahead of us. I want to talk to you just a little bit about our next webinar. It's going to be happening on September 1st. It's going to be opportunities for supporting voter engagement as a 501c3 social justice organization. The goal of this next webinar is to outline and to start to share the activities that we're going to be bringing you as a campaign for what your organizations can do. We're hoping to make this a buffet type option of options where your organization, whether they have a lot of time or a little time, a lot of resources, a little few resources, can find ways to be involved in voter engagement this election cycle in nonpartisan C3 safe ways. Please, if you register for this one, hopefully you'll register for the next one, get this information. Please also share this out with your friends and colleagues. The more the merrier. And hope to see you then. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Now to some quick videos from Diane Yantel and Sister Simone Campbell that you'll definitely want to stick around for. Michael?
Hi, I'm Diane Yantel, President and CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition. At NLIHC, we are committed to increasing the voter registration and turnout of low-income renters. The Our Homes, Our Votes 2020 project was established to encourage and support renters, housing organizations, resident associations, and others to participate in the upcoming elections. Renters believe deeply in the importance of voting and civic engagement. They're committed to participating in conversations and decisions that shape the future of our communities. But unfortunately, there are several barriers that impact low-income renters' ability to vote. For example, voter registration must be updated every time a person moves into a new home or is displaced from a previous home. For this reason, higher income people with more stable housing aren't frequently required to change their registration status in the way that low-income renters are. Additionally, systemic racism for decades, in fact, for centuries, has made it difficult for people of color to vote. These barriers include voter intimidation, polling locations that are more distant for low-income people, understaffed polling sites that lead to excruciatingly and unacceptably long lines, language accessibility of ballots, and several other injustices. Renters are impacted severely by these barriers. So we believe that the strongest elections are those that include the most voices. Addressing the disparity between a voter registration and turnout between low-income and wealthier households will create a policy environment that's more supportive of housing justice. Candidates and elected officials alike should think of low-income renters as a large active voting bloc with concerns that must be addressed. There is an extreme shortage of affordable, accessible homes in communities throughout the United States. The 2020 November election is about that issue just as much as any other. Social justice organizations must be committed to ensuring that their clients, members, volunteers, advocates, supporters, neighbors are committed to voting, because we know that in the end, affordable homes are built with ballots.
I'm Sister Simone Campbell, the Executive Director of Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice, and I want to say that voting is the essential element to making our democracy work. And when our democracy works, then we can care for the common good. But if we don't vote, our voices aren't heard, and our democracy suffers. So I want to say, step up, be involved in the election, make a difference, use your voice, because then we can mend the income and wealth disparity. Then we can ensure that the racism in our country is removed from our society, and that we can indeed find a way forward. It's up to us. We need to use our voices. Yes, we need to talk out loud, but even more important, we need to vote and ensure that everyone we know gets to the polls. It will make all the difference. That's why we at Network are involved in making sure this election counts. Your voice counts. Join us.
Thank you, Michael. Poverty, hunger, homelessness, insufficient wages, and injustice are political conditions, requiring the power of the vote to help eradicate them. As Sister Simone said, join us in these efforts on social media with the hashtag #nonprofitvote and on the next webinar. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.
On behalf of the Food Research and Action Center, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today and for your participation. I'd like to thank Leslie for her excellent presentation today. Audience members, at this point, we ask that you complete this brief survey that you should see now on your screen to help FRAC improve for future webinars. We do appreciate your feedback. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and at this time, you may now disconnect.